Working diner.
Yeah. Well, I decided to start reading Freddy's book, which I've never read before. I've had it on my shelf all these years. So there was some stuff in the beginning. Both sides look exactly the same. There was some stuff in the beginning that I thought was kind of Halloweenish. So that's what I'm going to read. At the beginning of this book, we meet our narrator, Jack Winesap, and he has given a very successful lecture on monsters, and a professor, an aged professor, what's his name? Professor Agard comes up to him and says, "My son is a monster." So that's sort of the thing that happens to get the story going. And here's, I thought, the Halloween mood pieces from Freddy's book. It was a gloomy old place, chilling as a barrow. Not at all my kind of thing, and the closer I got to it, the gloomier it became, also the quieter. I arrived at a kind of graveyard gate, writing over the top, formed of rusty iron letters, too many of them missing for the name of the place to be readable. I thought inevitably of creaky old allegories, demented Gothic tales, a thought that began in amused detachment but ended somewhere else so that a shiver went up my spine. The place really did give off the smell, or rather the idea, of death. Who would have chosen such a house, coming to Madison as a young professor, except for the reason that once it had been a splendid residence, wide porches, sunken gardens, and even now might be brought back, as he must have thought, might be made a grand place in which to raise a large family, give parties. It hardly took second sight to make out that the young woman who dreamed of playing hostess here was no longer among the living, or that the young professor who had proudly, somewhat fearfully taken the deed and mortgage had been changed by various accidents to another man entirely. The gate stood partway open, just a narrow gap. I held my bag in front of me, and pushing against wind, went through. I was in among the pines now. It was as if I'd lost, all at once, my hearing. Before I had my glove off to grope for and ring the bell, Professor Agard was at the door. "Come in," he shouted. His voice cracked out like a trumpet, belligerent and fearful. The door he held open, just a foot or so, was huge. He clutched the edge with both hands. It had heavy locks on it. He was smiling as if in a panic. Dressed as he'd been last night, rumpled suit, dark frayed silk tie. "Terrible out," he said loudly, somewhat accusingly. "I'm surprised you bothered." Let's see. I know what they go. So, we were in a cavernous living room with a threadbare Persian rug, an unlighted chandelier, here and there a lamp among the frail, spindly pieces of furniture. Most of the light in the room was thrown by a great rolling fire in the fireplace. It glowed dully on the wainscoting, the backs of books. Surely he'd made the fire for my visit, I thought, and for the same reason moved the 2 chairs up close to it. Between them a low antique table with brass ball, coffee, and a black glass top. His books were everywhere, shelved, crammed, stacked on all sides of us, some in English, others in foreign languages, mainly German and Scandinavian. Here and there one could make out dark paintings, framed documents. I'd been looking around for several seconds, giving up my hat, coat, scarf, and gloves, and nodding absently to a stream of complaints, irritable little shouts, when I noticed, with a start, an enormous black cat sitting prim and motionless near the fireplace, watching me with round yellow eyes. I must have jumped. "Oh," said the professor, his face falling, as if the day was now spoiled. "That's cozy." I looked at the cat, as if inviting conversation. She seemed at least as ordinarily human as the professor. But the cat had lain down on her side, half closing her eyes, dismissing me. I set down my bag and rubbed my hands together as if for warmth. "What a wonderful house," I called, loudly enough to be heard in the kitchen. The cat shrank, as if she thought I meant to harm her, then relaxed, not quite forgiving. From the kitchen came no answer, silence, like a judgment of Brahma. I sighed, picked up my bag, and drifted to the nearest of the bookshelves to look at the titles. So I occupied myself for a good 10 minutes. It was pleasant enough business, since I'd written my dissertation on medieval Scandinavia, a subject I've rarely thought about since, virtually the only subject in Agard's library. He had all the books I knew, which was hardly surprising, and a great many more I'd never heard of, other than those he had only a few old novels, Tolstoy and the like, and an occasional book of verse. Outside the tall, round-topped windows, I could see nothing but blowing snow and darkness, though it was still mid-afternoon. There were vertical shadows, puzzling for a moment, until at last I realized they were bars to keep out burglars or to hold something in. Ooh.